Welcome back to Veil of Epochs. The only historical deep dive where the past isn't just strange, it's borderline lethal. Stitched in silk. And ready to spontaneously combust. Tonight, we're asking a simple question. What if your outfit could literally kill you? Because if you think modern fashion is uncomfortable, try walking a mile in 15th century polaines so long they double as medieval ski equipment. Or squeezing into a corset so tight it could turn your lungs into a decorative pancake. Or maybe, just maybe, throwing on a dress dyed with enough arsenic to kill a small kingdom. Yes. Before Crocs offended your eyes. And fast fashion offended the planet. Historical fashion offended common sense. In this episode, we're unbuttoning the fatal seams of fashion history, where beauty meant suffering, elegance meant internal injuries, and the phrase drop dead gorgeous might have been taken a little too literally. So put on your fireproof wig, lace up your dignity, and prepare for a runway show straight from the grave. This is Fashion That Could Kill You, the medieval edition. Welcome to Veil of Epochs, where history isn't just wild, it's weaponized. Polaines. The medieval fashion statement that said, yes, I want to look stylish, and also be unable to use stairs. These were shoes with toes so long, they made ski boots look modest. In the 14th and 15th centuries, having elongated shoes, sometimes up to 24 inches long, was considered the ultimate power move. The longer the toe, the more status you had. Why? Because nothing screams nobility like tripping over your own feet every 6 steps. Let's pause to imagine the scene. You're late for a royal banquet. You grab your polaines, lace them up like a medieval ballerina, and then proceed to waddle across the cobblestone courtyard like a drunken duck in stilettos. Now, these shoes weren't just annoying. They were dangerous. The exaggerated tips made walking difficult. But they also deformed feet, caused back problems, and were outright banned multiple times for being impractical and sinful. Church officials literally said, these shoes are an offense to God, which, yeah. If your fashion choices require a priestly intervention, you may want to rethink your outfit to keep the tips from flopping around like a rogue snake. Some nobles even tied the ends of their polaines to their knees with laces. So if you're imagining someone hunched over like a cursed marionette, dragging themselves across a ballroom, you're absolutely right. Polaines, because fashion should hurt, confuse, and potentially get you excommunicated. Now let's jump forward a few centuries and take a moment to salute the garment that launched 1,000 fainting couches, the corset. Corsets are one of history's most iconic fashion pieces, and also one of its most medically questionable. Want an hourglass figure? Easy, just take a deep breath, and never exhale again. The tight lacing corsets of the 16th to 19th centuries weren't just restrictive, they were bone-breaking. Literally. Some women's ribs would crack under pressure, their organs would shift, and their ability to breathe was, well, let's just say a 10-minute walk was the medieval equivalent of running a marathon. But hey, who needs oxygen when your waist is 17 inches and you look fantastic? Corsets were so influential. They shaped not just bodies but entire architectural posture. Women were expected to stand perfectly upright, shoulders back, chin slightly up, like they were permanently prepared for portrait mode. Any slouching and boom, scandal. Let's not forget the social pressure, either. You weren't just wearing the corset for fashion, you were wearing it because being too natural was considered suspicious. Oh? She's breathing easily? Must be a witch. Even doctors at the time warned about corset injuries, but fashion said, nope. Fainting spells were so common that furniture makers invented the fainting couch. A fancy way of saying emergency seating for someone who's overdressed and under-oxygenated. Let's talk about wigs. Not just any wigs, towering, perfumed, powdered monstrosities that sat on your head like a layer cake with political ambition. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Wearing an enormous powdered wig was a sign of wealth, class, and potential combustion. The larger and more elaborate the wig, the more people assumed you were important, or trying desperately to convince them you were. Some of these wigs were so tall they required internal scaffolding. Think less hair accessory, more portable gazebo for pigeons. Now here's the thing, these wigs weren't just flamboyant. They were literal fire hazards. Why? Let's break it down. Powdered with starch and flour, extremely flammable. Sprayed with perfumes and oils, more flammable. Lit rooms by candlelight. Oh look, fire. This was a combination so bad it basically created walking Molotov cocktails in heels. There are recorded cases of women's wigs catching fire while passing too close to chandeliers. Or worse, leaning in to whisper sweet gossip over dinner. Imagine, Lady Georgina leaned in to spread a delicious rumour. And by dessert, her hair had launched a second Great Fire of London on her head. Some women even trained maids to follow them with fire-smothering cloths, or had hats modified with copper linings to reduce the risk. Which is just another way of saying, this outfit may kill me, but it's couture, darling. And it gets worse, wigs also attracted lice, mice, and sometimes even birds. One account, possibly exaggerated but spiritually accurate, tells of a lady who kept cheese in her wig to tempt her pet mouse to stay nearby. Now, we don't know if this is 100% factual, but we know that history never says no to weirdness. So we'll allow it. And let's not forget the social pressure behind it all. If your hair wasn't half your body height and visible from orbit, you were considered provincial. There were guidebooks to wig fashion, updated yearly, just in case your personal inferno wasn't on trend. Even men weren't safe. Judges, aristocrats, and powdered dandies wore their own version of the fire-tufted headpiece. The more curls and flour, the better. Just don't walk near open flame or try to blow out candles unless you're ready to lose your title and your eyebrows. The moral of the story? In the 18th century, if you wanted to be stylish, you had to choose between being hot, or literally catching fire. Ah yes, the ruff, the Elizabethan neckwear so enormous, it required its own zip code. If you've ever looked at a portrait from the late 16th century and thought, why does this person look like they shoved their head through a decorative lampshade? That's the ruff, big, bold, starched into oblivion, and about as breathable as a sealed jar of pickled fish. The ruff was the ultimate symbol of elegance, nobility, and upper body confinement. Let's set the scene. You're a member of the English elite in the 1580s. You wake up. You don't bathe, because obviously, but you do spend 3 hours getting your collar starched to maximum circumference. Servants use heated irons and wooden frames to create perfect pleats, one after another, until the entire apparatus resembles a frilled lizard defending its territory. Some ruffs measured up to 30 centimeters wide, on each side. That's 60 centimeters of sheer, flammable linen encircling your throat. You can't turn your head. You can't look down. And God forbid you sneeze. So why wear it? Because nothing says I am rich and important like wearing a handmade torture device around your neck. The logic was simple: the more ridiculous and restrictive your clothing, the more obvious it became that you didn't have to work. A massive ruff wasn't just a fashion statement, it was an announcement: I'm so far removed from labor, I physically cannot bend to pick up a coin. And don't even get me started on the cleaning. These ruffs were white, pure white. They were expected to stay spotless in a world where air pollution came from burning whale oil and your neighbor literally dumped their toilet bucket out the window. Naturally, only the wealthy could afford to clean, re-starch, and re-iron their ruffs regularly. In fact, having a well-maintained ruff was so linked with social class that people rented ruffs for portrait sittings, so they could appear richer than they actually were. Yes, medieval Instagram filters equals renting a ruff and pretending you woke up Elizabethan. But while the ruff was fashionable, it was also dangerous. The heavy starch used was often made with toxic chemicals like lead and lye. Inhaling this stuff daily wasn't exactly great for your lungs. If you fell, the rough could snap your neck backward or strangle you outright. And if you happened to be near fire, which again was the primary source of light, you were a walking marshmallow, waiting to roast. There are anecdotal records of people suffocating, fainting, or getting stuck in tight doorways because their collars were just too wide. And no, I'm not exaggerating, Elizabethan homes had narrow doors. These people were turning sideways like delivery trucks just to enter a room. In France, roughs grew so absurd that sumptuary laws were passed to limit their size. And in Spain, where roughs were called gorillas, they became so stiff and severe that they were used to literally immobilize the heads of politicians, under the logic that stillness equaled dignity. If your entire neck is in a vice grip, you can't nod along to peasant opinions. Royal win. And let's not ignore the social element. Roughs were gendered, classed, and coded. Men wore theirs flatter and stiffer, women had theirs frillier and sometimes open in the front like theatrical curtains, because of course your neck deserves its own stage. In many portraits, people look proud and regal in their ruffs. But if you zoom in close enough, their eyes seem to whisper, "Help. I haven't moved my neck in 3 days." Picture this, it's 1780. You're a lady of the court, the toast of Vienna, or maybe just trying to outshine your cousin at her 3rd marriage. You rise from your canopied bed, ready to seize the day. And what's the first thing you reach for? A little jar of death, also known as ceruse, a delightful paste made from white lead, vinegar, and a sprinkle of self-loathing. Ceruse was the 16th-18th century's go-to foundation. It gave you that porcelain, deathly pale, "Please check my pulse" glow that made people go, "Wow, she looks so frail and unwell. I must court her immediately." But why did people want to look like ghosts with credit card debt? Because pale skin was a symbol of wealth, status. And I don't work outdoors like those filthy peasants. Having any tan at all was considered vulgar. It meant labor, sweat, sunlight, gross. And thus, people slathered their faces in a lead-based paste that corroded the skin, caused hair loss, bleeding gums, and eventually neurological collapse. But hey, if you were dying, at least you looked expensive. One 17th century beauty guide recommended applying the ceruse mixture, then covering it in egg whites and sleeping like that overnight to seal in the fairness. Seal in the fairness? More like seal in the funeral arrangements. But wait, it gets worse, because you can't just have a ghostly face without rosy cheeks and red lips. Right? That's where vermilion came in, basically mercury sulfide. Yes, mercury. The same thing you're warned not to eat in sushi. This was applied as blush and lip stain, giving a pop of color over your sickly, gray-white skin. The result? A beautiful contradiction. I'm clearly dying, but I'm also flirtatiously flushed. And for the eyes? Oh, darling, belladonna drops were all the rage. Extracted from deadly nightshade, belladonna would dilate your pupils to make you look dreamy, mysterious, and slightly possessed. Side effects included blurry vision, hallucinations, blindness, occasional death. But again, priorities. Let's not forget arsenic wafers, which were eaten, yes, digested, to brighten the complexion from within. It was believed that tiny doses of arsenic would enhance the skin's glow and remove blemishes. Spoiler alert, they didn't remove blemishes, they removed your liver function. Now, you might be thinking, surely people must have known this was dangerous? Yes. And no, there were warnings, some physicians raised concerns. But the overwhelming cultural message was clear. You must be pale. You must be flawless. And if your jaw falls off, at least it'll be a dainty collapse. One tragic example is Maria Coventry, Countess of Coventry. a known beauty who died at 27, widely believed to be from years of using lead-based makeup. When people finally examined her, her face was found to be corroded under the surface, and her body riddled with toxicity. And yet, Saru's use continued for decades, because in a society where looking sickly was sexy, death by foundation was the price of elegance. In fact, the slow decline caused by these cosmetics became romanticized. Women were praised for being delicate, ethereal, and fragile like porcelain. Translation, slowly dying. But in high heels. It wasn't until much later, in the 19th century, when medical science began connecting the dots between lead in your pores, mercury in your mouth, arsenic in your breakfast, and death in your diary, that safer alternatives became popular. And even then, people were like, yes, but is it matte finish? Imagine stepping into a skirt so wide it could comfortably seat 4 guests and a well-behaved goat. Welcome to the wonderful, wobbly world of crinolines, 19th century fashion's answer to the question, what if your dress also functioned as architecture? These weren't just big dresses. They were industrial strength contraptions, made with steel hoops, horsehair, and layers of fabric designed to hold their shape like a circus tent with ambition. The goal? To achieve the ideal hourglass silhouette, impossibly tiny waist up top, and an exploding mushroom cloud of fabric below. Women didn't walk, they glided, like ships leaving the harbor, with the occasional bump into furniture, walls, or each other. Wearing a crinoline wasn't simply a fashion choice. It was a test of physics, spatial awareness, and survival instinct. If you wanted to sit, you had to know geometry. If you wanted to pass through a doorway, you had to turn sideways and pray. And if you wanted to get into a carriage, well, you better have 3 servants, a folding diagram, and divine assistance. But the real danger? Fire. Because here's what they don't tell you in fashion school: combining enormous, flammable skirts with open fireplaces, gas lamps, and crowded ballrooms is not exactly a recipe for safety. There are dozens of documented cases, dozens, of women who caught fire simply by backing up too close to a flame. The crinoline would act like a bellows, drawing air up underneath the skirt, causing it to ignite rapidly and burn from the inside out. And once it started, good luck. The steel frame made it almost impossible to stamp out the fire or even escape. Imagine being trapped inside your own clothing, a burning cage of beauty, while others watched in horror, or worse, tripped over the hem trying to help. The newspapers of the 1800s are filled with grim little one-liners like, Miss Harriet W. of Bath perished Thursday evening when her petticoats caught fire near the parlor stove. The piano survived. Just casual body count updates between ads for corsets and cough syrup laced with cocaine. In fact, so many women died in crinoline fires that they were sometimes referred to as fashion's funeral tents. At the height of the craze, more than 3,000 women in England alone were estimated to have died in crinoline-related accidents, falling down stairs, getting caught in machinery, being dragged under carriage wheels, or just spontaneously combusting in the pursuit of elegance. And still, the skirts kept getting bigger. Because here's the twisted part: the more impractical the fashion, the more elite it looked. If you could float around with 5 feet of skirt in every direction, you clearly didn't have to work, clean, run errands, or, let's be honest, escape danger. That was the point. Your vulnerability was the flex. It screamed, I am so rich, I can afford to die slowly and dramatically, while still matching my gloves. And the weight. A full crinoline ensemble could weigh upwards of 15 to 20 pounds, depending on how many underskirts you layered. It was like dragging a hammock full of fabric around your waist all day. Now imagine doing that on cobblestones, in summer, while trying not to pass out from the corset you're also wearing. You weren't just dressed. You were encased, like leftovers in foil. Or an overambitious souffle. There are even accounts of women becoming stuck, quite literally, in narrow hallways, pews, or staircases. There's one particularly hilarious, and sadly believable, story about a wedding where two bridesmaids tried to enter the church at once and became so jammed at the entrance that the groom had to climb through a window. But of course, manufacturers kept selling them as modern freedom of movement, because you could walk without fabric clinging to your legs. True. As long as you didn't want to turn, sit, or coexist with furniture. Eventually, the crinoline did fall out of favor, replaced by the slightly more sensible bustle, which still looked like you strapped a tea tray to your butt, but at least didn't actively try to murder you in a fire. By the end of the century, fashion shifted to slimmer silhouettes, aided in part by the brutal public ridicule and the growing awareness that maybe women deserved outfits that didn't require fire insurance. But for a brief, deadly moment in history, the ideal woman wasn't agile, strong, or practical. She was a fragile tower of fabric, defying logic and wind resistance alike. It's important to remember this: fashion has never really been about comfort. But in the 19th century, it wasn't even about function. It was about status through sacrifice, elegance through endurance, and femininity through fire hazard. If anyone ever tells you modern heels are painful, ask them if their shoes have ever launched them into a chandelier or caused them to be mistaken for a runaway hot air balloon. Because that was Tuesday in 1855. Let's talk about corsets, the glorified rib crackers of historical fashion. The silent scream underneath every portrait of a Victorian lady smiling demurely. You know that look? That elegant, composed, almost saintly vibe? Yeah, she's not being ladylike. She's just trying not to black out. Corsets were the fashion equivalent of stuffing a sleeping bag into a drinking straw. The idea was simple: make the waist look tiny, create an hourglass figure, and shove everything, organs included, into the right place. Except the right place was usually somewhere near your collarbones. And it wasn't just about looking good. Corsets were a daily expectation, worn by women of all social classes, from noble ladies to factory workers. You might think, well, surely they didn't lace them that tightly every day, right? Oh honey, they did. Especially if they were trying to train their waist into permanent submission. The tightest recorded waist, just under 13 inches. That's the circumference of a medium pizza. Now imagine fitting your entire digestive system inside one. There are real anatomical drawings from the time showing the compressed rib cage, the displaced stomach, and the squashed lungs of corset-wearing women. Breathing was shallow. Eating was difficult. Fainting was so common that it became part of polite society. Hence the invention of the fainting couch, not for drama, but because someone literally couldn't get enough oxygen after dinner. The fashion manuals of the time even encouraged girls to start wearing corsets young, sometimes as early as age 8 or 9, because the body is more malleable. Translation: the bones are still soft enough to reshape. You know who else has malleable bones? Play-Doh. And corsets weren't just about fashion, they were tied to morality. A tight corset meant you were virtuous, self-disciplined, and had controlled desires. Loosen it too much? Scandalous. A moral slip. Oh. Did you see Clara at the opera? Her waist looked comfortable. The horror. Doctors at the time had mixed opinions. Some insisted that corsets caused miscarriages, spinal deformities, organ displacement, chronic fainting, hysteria, which was the 19th century term for woman acting like a human being. Others, often male physicians hired by corset manufacturers, cheerfully declared them completely safe, as long as worn properly. Which is a little like saying, sure, you can sit on this bear trap, just don't close it too tight. Now to be fair, not all corsets were created equal. Some were more flexible, more lightly boned, with whalebone. Mind you, and many women reported genuinely enjoying the posture support. But the truth is, the extreme tight-lacing culture, especially among the upper class, was intense. There are famous cases of women having floating ribs surgically removed to reduce waist size. Let me repeat that, ribs removed for fashion. In one infamous case from 1859, a young woman attending a formal dance was laced so tightly she suddenly collapsed mid-waltz, later found to have cracked a rib, which punctured her liver. But the newspapers were more focused on what color gloves she was wearing. It's important to note, some women did rebel. By the late 1800s, the dress reform movement emerged, led by women who were tired of dressing like trussed turkeys. They advocated for looser clothing, healthier postures, and, gasp, functional breathing. But society wasn't ready. They were mocked, caricatured, even accused of being unwomanly. After all, if a woman wasn't willing to suffer silently and stylishly, was she even a woman at all? What's even more ironic, the corset's shape continued to evolve into the 20th century, but its legacy remained. While the materials got softer, the pressure remained psychological. The hourglass ideal never left. It just morphed into diet culture, plastic surgery, and now, Instagram filters. So yes, corsets may be gone from daily life, but the message they carried, that a woman's worth is measured by how small, restricted, and compliant she can be, that message still echoes in every beauty trend that promises to slim you down, suck you in, or train your waist. Today, if you wear a corset, it's usually part of a costume, cosplay, or fashion throwback. Back then, it was daily life, and a slow reshaping of your body to meet an ideal invented by people who didn't have to wear it. And let's not forget the ultimate irony, for all that pain, discomfort, and sacrifice, the corset wasn't about function, freedom, or even true beauty. It was about control. A literal cage for the torso, just elegant enough to call oppression ladylike. Now, you might think wearing a wig is pretty harmless. You pop it on, you look fabulous, and maybe fool a few friends into thinking your hair grew 6 inches overnight. But in the 17th and 18th centuries, wigs weren't just accessories, they were status, duty, and flammable nightmares perched proudly atop your skull. Let's rewind to France, because where else would absurd luxury and casual danger be best friends? In the golden age of powdered wigs, your social rank wasn't determined by your wealth, your education, or even your behavior. No. It was all about how much synthetic hair you could pile on top of your actual hair. The bigger, the better, the taller, the nobler. By the late 1700s, noble women were walking around with 3-foot-tall coiffures built from wire frames, horsehair, flour, wool, and whatever else they could get their hands on, sometimes even incorporating miniature ships, bird cages, fake gardens, or fruit bowls as part of the ensemble. These wigs weren't just decorative. They were life-consuming projects. To build these gravity-defying monuments, you needed a hairdresser, usually male, because of course, several hours, a ladder, in some cases, and a high tolerance for head and neck strain. Once the wig was in place, it was meant to stay there for days, even weeks. You didn't remove it at night. You slept sitting up, like a freshly embalmed pharaoh, to preserve the shape. You didn't wash it, you just powdered it. With what? You ask? With flour, actual wheat flour, which not only attracted bugs, but had the fun side effect of turning your head into a moldy baguette if it got damp. And because the wigs could get greasy, sticky, and, let's be honest, revolting, people often stored scented objects like potpourri, cinnamon bark, or dried orange peels inside the hair to mask the smell. Some wigs even had mouse traps discreetly hidden in them, not as a statement piece, but as a defense mechanism. Yes, Wigs came with their own vermin protocols. But none of that compares to the real danger, fire. Remember, this was a time of open flame everything, candelabras, fireplaces, torches, and these towering wigs, styled with grease, powder, and horsehair, were basically kindling with good posture. Ballroom gossip includes stories of women brushing too close to chandeliers and igniting instantly, turning polite conversation into flaming chaos. There's one particularly dramatic account of a duchess who turned her head too fast during a soiree and set a curtain on fire, which then spread to half the estate. The wig survived. Her reputation, not so much. Wigs were such a fire hazard that some upper-class homes started banning them at dinner parties. Can you imagine getting an invitation that says, "Formal attire. Powdered wigs discouraged, we'd like to keep the drapes intact this time." And yet, people kept wearing them. Because fashion, like history, often repeats itself, and never learns. And then there were the men's wigs, less dramatic, sure, but no less ridiculous. The classic white powdered periwig became a symbol of authority and intelligence. Judges, barristers, philosophers, all of them wanted to look like they were carrying a dead sheep on their heads. It made sense at the time. Of course, not everyone could afford a real hair wig, so the lower classes had to settle for cheaper alternatives, wool, straw, or even animal hair. This led to the unfortunate phrase "smells like a borrowed wig" entering casual gossip. It meant, "You're faking it and I can smell the goat." Eventually, wigs fell out of fashion, not because they were silly or impractical, but because they became associated with the aristocracy right before the French Revolution. Turns out, when people are starving and you're walking around with a pastry display on your head, they start asking difficult questions. Like, would your wig like to join you at the guillotine? And just like that, powdered wigs disappeared faster than a royal pardon during a bread riot. Today, we look back at them with a mix of horror and delight. They were bizarre, brilliant, and undoubtedly deadly. A hairstyle that doubled as a heat source, snack tray, pest control system, and potential arson trigger. But let's not laugh too hard. We still wear things that hurt us in the name of beauty. We just call them influencer approved. Let's set the scene. It's the 14th century. You're a nobleman in France or Poland. You've got status, wealth, and a burning desire to let people know your toes exist, half a meter before the rest of you does. Introducing the crackle, a shoe so pointy it made knives insecure. The name comes from the city of Krakow, Poland, where this delightfully absurd trend supposedly began. But it spread across Europe faster than a medieval rash. Now, when I say pointy, I don't mean like the elegant almond-toed shoes you see today. No, I mean literal sabers for feet. Some shoes reached 24 inches, 60 centimeters, of toe extension. That's the length of 2 large Subway sandwiches taped to the front of your boots. And just like with modern status symbols, the more useless it was, the more important you were. If your shoes were long enough to trip 3 peasants before you entered a room, it meant you clearly didn't do manual labor, because you couldn't. You literally couldn't walk properly. There are accounts of nobles tying the ends of their shoes to their knees with little golden chains to stop them from flopping around too much, or worse, slapping someone in the face during a court dance. Imagine trying to waltz with 2 swords on your feet while chained to your own legs. Now imagine doing it to impress a lady who's wearing a 4-foot-wide hoop skirt and balancing a bird cage in her hair. Why did people do this? Well, same reason people wear oversized Balenciaga sneakers or pants that make walking upstairs a logistical nightmare. Fashion equals power. And as always, fashion had its way of trickling downward. Soon even the middle class started wearing moderately pointy shoes. The nobility? Not pleased. And so the game of ridiculous escalation began. Oh, the blacksmith's son has a 6-inch shoe? I'll take 18. Please, waiter. I'll have the roast duck and a pair of toe daggers. It got so ridiculous that the church publicly condemned crackles as symbols of vanity and decadence. Preachers warned that long-toed shoes were the devil's skis, not a direct quote, but very much in spirit. Some clergy even claimed that demons had space to sit in those shoes. Apparently taking public transportation was tough for Beelzebub. Eventually, even the kings had enough. In 1463, King Edward IV of England banned crackles longer than 2 inches, declaring them dangerous and vain. He wasn't wrong. These things were trip hazards, fire risks, terrible for posture, and impossible to hide if you ever tried to sneak into a room. Hint, your toes would arrive 10 seconds before you did. Still, bans didn't work immediately. Because as always, if you ban fashion, it becomes even more desirable. For a time, some nobles continued wearing them in secret, underneath long robes or at underground dinner parties, where presumably they compared sizes like insecure sword fighters. It took nearly a century for the fad to die completely. But the crackle left its mark, literally. Some castle floors from the time show deep toe-shaped scratches. Remnants of noblemen scraping their shoes along stone corridors. A medieval roomba's worst nightmare. But perhaps the greatest tragedy of all? No one stopped to ask, what if someone steps on the end of this? And the answer was, you fall flat on your face in front of the Duchess of Burgundy. And your family is never invited back. Today, we can laugh, but fashion hasn't changed that much. We still wear things we can't run in. We still chase status through impractical trends. And deep down, we still believe, if it makes my feet miserable, it must look fabulous. Imagine losing a loved one. Tragic. Heartbreaking. A time for quiet reflection and emotional healing. Now imagine being told that in order to express your grief properly, you must wear nothing but black. Cover every inch of your body. Abandon all jewelry except jet beads. Stop attending parties. Never smile. And maintain this look for a minimum of 2 years. Welcome to Victorian morning fashion, where sadness had a dress code. In the 19th century, Queen Victoria, the eternal mother of dramatic vibes, essentially invented the modern concept of institutionalized grief when her husband Prince Albert died in 1861. She never stopped mourning him. Literally, she wore black every day for the next 40 years, set up a shrine in his memory, and basically said, I'm not moving on. Ever. Let's all be sad. Stylishly, society followed suit. Mourning became a highly structured, almost theatrical performance, with a strict set of rules about what you could wear and how long you were allowed to be devastated. The more black you wore, the more serious you appeared. And we're not talking elegant little black dresses here. This was full length, floor sweeping, crepe covered, matte black doom cloth. Here's how it worked. In stages: deep mourning, aka don't even look at me. Duration, 6 months to 1 year. Required full black from head to toe. No shiny fabrics. No silk. No jewelry except for jet, a fossilized coal-like material, very emo. Veils so heavy they were essentially wearable funerals. Social activities banned: dancing, visiting friends, joy. Second mourning, aka maybe I'll say hello. You could now introduce some dull fabrics, maybe grey or mauve. If you were feeling wild, still somber, still serious, but a whisper of hope. Half mourning, aka I'm emotionally available again. Lilac, lavender, and soft colors were allowed. You could now go out again. But slowly, people around you would nod in approval like, ah yes, she's only 40% dead inside now. And the rules didn't just apply to women. Men had to wear black suits, armbands, and somber cravats. But, surprise, they were expected to mourn for far less time. Usually 3 to 6 months. Because apparently Victorian society believed that grief was gendered and men had important things to do, like not processing their emotions. The mourning industry exploded. Entire departments in stores were dedicated to funeral fashion. You could buy black gloves, black parasols, black hats, black stationery, and even black-edged calling cards that said, "I'm too sad for tea." There were mourning dolls, mourning jewelry, often made from the deceased's hair. Because sure, why not? And mourning photography, a special genre where the deceased were photographed one last time, often propped up to appear lifelike, which, depending on how lifelike they looked, was either touching or horrifying. And if you didn't follow the rules, social suicide. You could be shunned for not being sad enough, or for being sad incorrectly. Showing up in shiny satin too soon after a funeral? You monster. Imagine the scandal. She wore a navy blue sash only 8 months after her husband's demise. I heard she smiled at a garden party. Disgraceful. But the cherry on this sorrowful Sunday? Crepe fabric. A dull, scratchy, black textile that absorbed light, happiness, and will to live. It was stiff, hard to clean, and smelled like despair. And yet, people wore it. Because nothing says I'm grieving like sweating inside a socially mandated sadness cocoon. It wasn't all bad, though. Mourning fashion gave people a structure, a way to externalize grief in a society that didn't talk about emotions directly. It also created jobs, allowed for deeply personal expressions of remembrance. And ironically, it launched fashion revolutions. Half-mourning colors like lilac and slate became popular in mainstream clothing later. Still, let's be honest, if your outfit has to say, "I have known nothing but darkness for 7 fortnights," maybe it's time to rethink the system. Picture this, it's the 1850s. You walk into a ballroom. Everyone turns. Not because of your charm, but because you're wearing the most radiant emerald green gown they've ever seen. It catches the candlelight, glimmers like forest dew, and makes your competition look like a soggy potato sack. You are, without doubt, the it girl of the evening. What no one knows is that your dress is also a biological weapon. Welcome to the age of arsenic-based dyes. Specifically Sheila's green and Paris green, the Victorian answer to, what if we invented color and immediately made it deadly? These shades of green were invented in the late 18th century and quickly took over everything. Dresses, wallpaper, curtains, gloves, artificial flowers, children's toys, book covers, and even candy wrappers. Why? Because we like to suffer beautifully. The secret to their brightness? Arsenic trioxide. Yes, that arsenic. The one famously known for its murdery tendencies. But here's the kicker, no one really knew it was deadly. At first, the dyes looked so fresh and new that everyone ignored the growing number of people coughing, fainting, or breaking out in green-tinted rashes. Factory workers who handled the dye started losing hair, teeth, and eventually, life. Women who wore the dresses often reported burning skin, sores, nausea, and mysterious chronic illnesses. Doctors began to suspect a connection. One woman famously died with green powder embedded in her internal organs. And what did society say? Yes, but have you seen the vibrancy? It glows. Even Charles Dickens, a man not known for his sensitivity, had to speak out when children began falling ill due to arsenic-printed wallpapers in their bedrooms. But still, people defended the trend. It was like watching someone eat radioactive soup while saying, well, it's got a really unique flavor profile. Even Queen Victoria's own court was affected. One of her dressmakers became violently ill after working with arsenic-colored fabrics. And reports suggest the Queen may have quietly removed arsenic green from her personal wardrobe after the scandal broke. Eventually, the tide turned, slowly. Public health officials and newspapers began calling out the industry. One headline dramatically asked, "Is your dress poisoning you?" Another pamphlet featured skeletons wearing fashionable green gowns dancing with the devil. And honestly, that should be a Coachella outfit now. Manufacturers fought back, claiming the dyes were totally safe if used correctly, which, In this case, meant not inhaled, touched, or worn near your skin. So, essentially useless. By the 1870s, arsenic greens were being phased out in favor of safer dyes. But not before they left a trail of death, disease, and fabulously fatal fashion in their wake. Today, if you visit some antique Victorian books or wallpapers in old homes, they still retain traces of arsenic. Museums sometimes keep them in sealed glass cases, like biohazardous fashion fossils. So the next time you wear a bold, attention-grabbing color, just remember, at least it's not trying to kill me. Probably. So, what have we learned today? If you were alive in medieval or early modern Europe and wanted to look fashionable, you basically had three choices: look dull and survive, look great and risk suffocating, snapping your ribs, or bursting into flames. Look deadly, because you actually were. And in a way, maybe fashion hasn't changed all that much. We're still breaking our backs for impossible silhouettes, still suffering through heat stroke at Fashion Week, still putting up with shoes that double as medieval torture devices. But at least now, our makeup is usually not laced with mercury, our dresses don't off-gas arsenic, and if our hair catches fire, it's probably just from a birthday cake incident, not a powdered wig soaked in flammable oils. We've evolved. Kind of. The truth is, history has always blurred the line between vanity and danger. And there's something darkly impressive about how far humans were willing to go, how much discomfort, pain, and risk they embraced, all for the sake of being admired, or envied, or simply not burned at the stake for looking different. So the next time you curse at your tight jeans, or your itchy sequins, or your ridiculous outfit that looked better on the mannequin, remember, at least your clothes aren't trying to actively assassinate you. That's it from us today. If you enjoyed this dive into the dangerous world of medieval and early modern fashion, don't forget to violently corset lace that like button, aggressively plague mask the subscribe, and leave a comment telling us which historical fashion trend you would absolutely die for. Literally. From powdered wigs to poisoned hems, fashion has always been a bit homicidal. This is Veil of Epochs, lifting the veil on the glamorous nightmares of history. We'll see you next time, unless you fall victim to the next trend. Good night, and may your ruffles never catch fire.